Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Flamethrower, this is Battlefield 1. In today's video, we're going to be taking a close look at the A7V heavy tank in Battlefield 1. What we're essentially going to be doing is a guide for how to best use this tank on the battlefield. We're going to be covering a number of basic tactics and appliances and how to get the most out of your tank, as well as cover the different variants of the tank and which you should be employing for what situation. Last but not least, of course, we're going to compare it to some of the other tank variants out there and see how this tank compares to both the competition and in what cases it's more effective than those. Starting off then with some basics about the tactics and appliance of the heavy tank in general, not actually version specific, but more generally the heavy tank as entire unit. Now there's two essential play styles that you need to know about when it comes to the heavy tank, and a good tank driver will essentially employ both of them. Now one of them is a much more passive, reserved play style, similar to maybe the flanker light tank when taking out large groups of infantry out from a distance, or maybe even the artillery truck sniping at enemy armor. The simple reason for this is you don't have a turret, and as such, if you are alone in your tank or understaffed in whichever tank variant you have, if you get into a cluster close situation with multiple assaults trying to take you down, there's little you can actually do to kill them, unless of course they're all conveniently lined up right in front of you, which is usually, sadly however, not the case. The second mode is all in essentially. You get on a point and you wreck ass on the point. But you have to note here that wrecking ass is not necessarily what you are going to be doing, but what your gunners are going to be doing. While you can take out targets from the front, the strength of the heavy tank is that it essentially can be a 360-degree turret with a ridiculous amount of armor that can take out anything on the point. Which means if you have a tank with most of your driver or gunner positions occupied, you can become very, very dangerous for infantry in close quarter at medium range, and especially important on those more clustery infantry close quarter focused objective points that you find in most operations and of course conquest maps in Battlefield 1. These are the two basics, so you really have to know when to rush in, when to stay back. And of course, when taking out enemy armor, a distance is usually going to be better for you as tank driver than up close, because it means you're less likely to get surprised by enemy infantry that make the difference between you winning and losing against another enemy armor vehicle. Another point I'd like to add here at this point in the video is you don't really have to be afraid in this vehicle of any other armored vehicle other than the land ship. The land ship, if fully staffed, especially if it's the tank hunter variant, can two-shot you. Now, not with two actual shots, but given that there's 3 people in the tank, all of which in the tank hunter variant can actually do damage to you. If you're unlucky, you're going to get yourself two-shot. Just happened to me earlier today. I was driving along in my tank, saw a land ship up on a mountain, relaxing there, thought nothing too much of it. Maybe I'll take a couple of pot shots at him, and suddenly I had 50 health less than I did before, because both his gunners and himself had hit all their shots when firing at me. So be aware of that when using this tank. You are an anti-armor beast and an anti-infantry beast with the help of your gunners, not you yourself, unlike, for example, something like the light tank, the flanker tank, where you are much more flexible in who you engage. But you do have that one weakness, that one armor threat you have to be careful of, and that is a fully staffed land ship. Having talked then about how to use this tank best and what kind of your worst enemies or easiest targets are, let's talk a little bit about the actual weaponry that the heavy tank has available to itself. And by this I mean the primary weaponry for the actual tank driver, because once we get into the secondary weaponry available of course to all your side gunners, this is where we get into discussing the different variants, which we will do in just a moment. Now you have essentially a canister shot and you have a primary shot, which with you can do quite a bit of damage. It's one of the heaviest, I believe, actual main weapon shots that you have on tanks, at least for now. I'm not quite sure how the assault tank may change this. And of course, when it comes to kind of behemoths and the new Char 2C, which is coming in the upcoming DLC, that obviously has an even heavier cannon. But amongst the current set of base tanks, it does have the heaviest gun and does one of the highest amounts of damage possible, which means of course it's fantastic for taking out enemy armor. You can do some real good damage, especially against those softer targets. I'm thinking here of course armored vehicles, which are very easy to kill with this tank, and also light tanks and artillery tanks, which can be very quickly down if they're not careful and get behind cover. If you're lucky enough, you can probably do a 3-shot on most of those light armored targets. With that being said, then your secondary shot, sadly, is the canister shot. Now, sadly, I say, because it means your range limited. The canister shot is only really good, I'd say, up to about 30, 40 meters. Maybe sometimes you can stretch it out to 50 if your target has got a little bit of low health and doesn't have any good cover, which means their entire body is exposed, which makes a big difference. Somebody going prone is actually pretty smart in front of a heavy tank because you've got a very small chance of actually doing a one-shot kill at distances beyond 30 meters, unless you actually hit your primary explosive shot, which of course is more difficult because that shot of course has drop, unlike the canister shot. So you've got to be a little bit careful. You're good at infantry, and you're good at infantry at close quarters and only in the situations where they're in front of you, but you're not good at against infantry at long range. With a bit of practice, of course, you can use your explosive payload to take out infantry at long range. Nevertheless, you're limited to 6 shots before you have to resupply. There's only so much you can do, and this tank has a very slow turning speed, which means of course it can be very difficult to take somebody out if they're suddenly behind you. You should be aware of that as well. But that's of course where the gunners come in, and this is where we get into the different packages, variants of this tank which are available. And unlike other tank variants, they don't differ necessarily in the primary weaponry department, but they do differ especially in the gunners, what the gunners have available to them, and your special abilities as driver themselves. Starting off then with what variants there are available. You have the base assault package, you have the breakthrough package, and you have the flamethrower package. Now the assault package is the base variant of the heavy tank. It comes with 5 gunner seats, all which have machine guns, which means they're good at both medium close range and somewhat at long range. Not great, but nevertheless, compared to the other 2 variants, better at long range. They're more flexible in their application. They can, however, not do damage against armored targets, which means, and you're going to want to keep this in mind, the only person that can actually do damage to any armored target is then the main gunner, which can of course be a disadvantage if you suddenly get flanked by the side or are dealing with a very competent player of similar magnitude or even in a similar tank, which really means it comes down to these small differences in damage you can output on who's going to win that firefight. Now, the special abilities of the heavy assault tank are an emergency repair, as all tanks have, which allows you essentially just to get an extra bit of health whenever you really want to. That is to say, it allows you to heal up to your maximum health. You can't run around suddenly with 120 health. It's simply a quick repair if you so will. And this one has a smoke screen. Limited usability in my opinion. It can be situationally useful if you're getting sniped with the heavy tank from something like an artillery truck or a land ship, and this allows you to kind of draw back and go behind cover without them actually seeing where you're going. However, in practice, I haven't found this feature to be too useful, and I personally don't usually employ it when using the heavy assault tank variant. With that being said, let's move on then to the breakthrough tank. Now, this is, in my opinion, the most interesting of the 3 variants, although, of course, the flamethrower has got quite a bit of nice eye candy as well. Now, the breakthrough package has less seats, only 3 gunner seats here, which means you can transport less of your teammates. However, and we'll talk about this later, given that usually the heavy tank is mostly empty anyway, this is not much of a problem. What's interesting, however, about the secondary weapons, the gunner weapons that are available on this tank, is that they are heavier. They are 20mm cannons, which means not only do they do great splash damage against infantry, they also have quite a bit of drop, which means you're going to want to use them more in close quarter, but it also means they can do damage against vehicles, and actually not too little damage at all. You're looking at damage close to that of a light flanker tank here against an armored vehicle, which means if you've actually got somebody on comms or somebody gunning, you can actually position your tank against an enemy armored vehicle in a way that allows both your gunner and you as primary tank driver to damage that vehicle. This will effectively give you a huge edge on other heavy tanks and most other armored vehicles. You should not underestimate the amount of damage one of these guns can actually do. You're talking here about easily 20 to 40 damage in a engagement between 2 heavy tanks, and this is on top obviously of what the damage that you're going to do. That means an easy win for you if the enemy tank driver doesn't have the same or you're not already previously damaged. The problem with this, of course, is that it requires quite a bit of team coordination. If you're on comms with somebody, that's fine, it works well. If you've just got your randoms in your tank, usually they probably won't get it. If you're lucky, they may will. Another advantage, however, of the heavy breakthrough tank is, of course, that it's much better in close quarter than the LMGs are, simply because the secondary weapons, the gunner weapons, do great splash damage in close quarter, which means taking out especially larger groups of infantry with a quick drive-by is a lot easier with this tank than, for example, the assault package version of it. Now, this tank, by the way, comes, as all heavy tanks do, with emergency repairs, and it can, instead of dropping smoke around, drop supplies for your friendly teammates. semi-useful. It's going to give you a few points, but much like the smoke ability, it's not actually going to change which tank you choose based on which of these special abilities you have available. With that being said, then let's move on to the last variant of the heavy tank that we have available, the Flamethrower package. Certainly the one that looks the fanciest. However, I wouldn't argue that it's necessarily the best of all options. To start us off then, as with all vehicles, same primary weapons for the driver. The secondary weapons, the weapons that the gunners get, are two split here. Two gunners actually get flamethrowers, and the other two gunners get the same LMGs that you have on the standard assault package. Now, this is actually quite interesting because it means that actually you're more flexible even than the assault package theoretically, because you've got the LMGs, which can take out targets at medium range, with the flamethrowers great for close quarters. The problem I've noticed, however, with this is that usually if somebody actually does get into your tank, they're not actually going to sit into the LMG position. They're just going to go for the flamethrower, which essentially means they're not going to take out that pesky assault player that's camping 40 meters to your left outside of your sight, who's using his AT rocket gun to whittle you slowly down. So in practice, not maybe as useful as the assault package at longer distances than it possibly could be because of the way players play Battlefield and Battlefield 1. However, theoretically, actually, it is the most flexible of all of them because, of course, the flamethrower positions, the flamethrower gunner positions are great for close quarter. Massive damage, easy to clear out a house. Just shoot that through the window and everything that's inside is burnt toast for breakfast. It's absolutely great at running through, for example, a map like Amiens onto an objective like E and just lighting everything up and just watching half of the enemy team burn to death. Now, the special abilities here are the emergency repair and the gas emitter. Now, the gas emitter essentially throws gas grenades around you to deals damage to your enemies and, of course, suppresses your friendly forces. It's annoying for friendly forces to the point where I say don't deploy it around friendly forces. It's also annoying to enemies that are going to try and see for you. However, most times you get killed by grenades in a tank or AT rocket guns. I also, like all other special abilities, other than, of course, the emergency repair on the heavy tank, find it to be very infrequently useful. It's a neat addition, but it's not going to make you choose this tank simply so that you can throw out a couple of gas grenades. With that being said, then, you should have noticed a pattern here. The base heavy tanks are very much dependent on their actual gunners for full maximal usage. And this is the key problem with the heavy tank and why in actually many situations it ends up being inferior to a number of other tanks out there. The heavy tank is a great tank on its own. No discussion. However, if you want to use its secondary ability in that sense, the ability to rush in on a point and wreck infantry and not just simply use it as sniper artillery truck style from longer distances, you're going to need to get quite a few players in your tank. And sadly, players don't have great patience. I'm not going to accuse anybody here because I myself don't have that patience in most situations either, but most players don't want to sit around in a tank all time. They want to get on the objective, get out their LMG, their SMG, and start slaying the enemy in style. They don't want to wait around for you to position them in a position where they can actually do damage, which means the heavy tank isn't as effective as maybe something like a light tank when it actually comes to capturing objectives. That's not to say it'll absolutely not dominate these lighter vehicles, but a very smart player will try and avoid the heavy tanks in most situations, get cover, or get friendly infantry or armor to help him out in taking out a heavy tank. That is to say, this tank is effective when you are alone. It's, however, truly at its best when you have multiple players gunning for you. And this is somewhat my problem with the heavy tank. I don't like being limited in the kinds of targets I can take out with armor. Probably because I played so much armor in Battlefield 4, I'm used to using the tank very flexibly at targets for all ranges really, and you truly could, as tank driver in Battlefield 4, thanks to the heavy LMG secondary weapon option, use your tank at truly all ranges, even to take out snipers. This is different in Battlefield 1, especially when it comes to the heavy tank. So when you're trying to use this tank, try to make sure you're paying attention to who you have in your tank and what tank you're using when determining what combat distances you're going to take and whether or not you're going to go in for an aggressive push onto an objective. Because a good heavy tank driver with a few gunners in position is going to make a huge difference to any game, be that Operation or Conquest. It allows you to push onto a point and cause complete disarray amongst the enemy team if they're truly trying to hold down that point, especially useful in operations on maps like Amiens. This allows not only for the rest of your team team to push up onto the objective, but it also allows you to clear a large number of enemy infantry off an objective, which can truly make the difference between losing or winning a game in operations, unlike something like a light tank, which while can get a number of kills over a round, is never going to have that significant of a sudden impact in a game, essentially turning the tide from a loss to a win. That's the difference between something like a light tank and a heavy tank. One of them is very situationally good, otherwise alright, versus the other one is a constant, reliable performer. That's what I at least consider the main difference between these two tanks, for example, and what I consider when trying to use the heavy tank to its fullest potential. With that all being said, then I'd like to know from you down below in the comments what you think of the heavy tank. Which variant is your favorite variant? Are you a heavy tank user, or do you prefer the light tank like myself? Maybe you're more of an artillery truck user or something like the land ship with a couple of squad mates. Leave that down below in the comments, as well as of course your future video suggestions. Would you like me to do any more vehicle guides, maybe for the attack plane, the bomber, or the land ship artillery truck? Feel free to leave that down below in the comments, of course, as well. But with all that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching and hope to see you in the next Battlefield 1 video.